15 years on the front line has transformed a ragtag militia into a resilient fighting force. The actions of the civilian joint task force while working with the Nigerian security forces has earned them recognition and respect here.
Back then, no one was able to go to the mosque or even take and bury their dead in a cemetery. That's when we decided the atrocities of Boko Haram had to stop. We got together and formed the civilian task force, arresting and handing the insurgents to security forces.
The operations helped in removing Boko Haram fighters from nearly all areas they occupied in Nigeria's northeast.
As well as taking part in operations, these groups of fighters are a vital source of intelligence for Nigerian security forces. They also conduct spot checks and search operations like this to stop the infiltration of weapons into populated areas.
As a result, the local communities are rebuilding and businesses are thriving.
We were able now to create a resilient, community of young men who are all ever ready to fight for their people and for themselves.
The militia says Boko Haram is now in retreat.
We've convinced many of them to join us in fighting their former comrades with resounding success.
But questions are also being asked about what happens to these well-trained and experienced volunteer fighters once their task is finished. Ahmed, Idris, Jazeera, Maiduguri.
Well, let's talk to Kabir Adamu about this. He's a security analyst and managing director at Beacon Consultancy and is joining us live from Abuja. Thank you for your time. Tell us more first about this joint security task force. How would you describe them? As a vigilante group?
Yes, a vigilante group that was created in 2013 to block the gap that exists in the security arrangement. Nigeria runs a federally controlled security structure. And so when asymmetric warfare of the type that terrorist groups like the Jamaat al-Ahlissin al-Dawati wal-Jihad and the Islamic State in West Africa province became active in the Northeast, there were gaps. And so these vigilante groups emerged to block this gap. And I think it's the model really for developing countries and, in fact, the Western world to understand how civilian populations can support counter terrorism operations.
All right, I'll ask you about the vigilantes, because that, when you say a vigilante group, very often that has a very negative connotation to it. But before we get to that, let me ask you about the advantages this particular group has had over Nigerian state security forces, for example. What sort of results have they been able to achieve in the north?
But because this membership of the civilian joint task force are from the local communities, they understand nuances, the culture, they understand roots, they also understand some of the dynamics that exist in those locations a little bit more than the federal security agencies do. And so, for instance, when the federal security forces are going into the forest for operations, these civilian joint task force members are able to guide them, point out to them routes and perhaps even possible pitfalls that could be used to ambush against them. Then the ability of the local population to relate with them is increased. So intelligence gathering, intelligence sharing is also increased. And then there are also some other cultural nuances that this membership of the civilian joint task force are better able to garner than the federal security forces.
Right. So they have an advantage being a civilian community-based approach that knows the lay of the land, you say. Coming back to the point of a vigilante group, again, in many parts of the world, when you say a vigilante group, it carries negative connotations. Is there enough oversight of this particular group? There have been, as you know, accusations against the Nigerian military itself of committing abuses in some of these places where it's been carrying out this war against armed groups like Boko Haram. What sort of oversight is there of this task force?
So at the initial stages, these concerns were higher. At some point they were recruiting child soldiers, both male and female. The rules of engagement were being abused, heavy-handedness, and several other allegations against the group. But over time, especially the UN system, UNICEF, UNDP, has engaged with the Civilian Joint Task Force and has supported in training them and in introducing some governance structures that have reduced some of these concerns. Then more importantly, the Nigerian military has also stepped in. Some of the trainings that have been given to the Civilian Joint Task Force is coming from the Nigerian military. And then I think the state government in Borno, which is where the epicenter of the insurgency, has also stepped in supporting the development of the Civilian Joint Task Force. One of the major challenges has been payment. How will they be paid? And so the state government plus the military has also supported payments of stipend to them, and that has reduced the tendency for the abuse of rules of engagement and sometimes even recruitment of persons who shouldn't be in the system. It's not yet rosy, but a lot of the challenges have been addressed.
Thank you so much for talking to us about this. Very interesting to hear your insight. Kabir Adamu, Managing Director of Beacon Consultancy, live there from Abuja. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.